What happens when the CEO of a nationwide supermarket chain walks into one of his own stores and sees his employees crying on the job? No one recognized him. No one knew he was watching. But what he discovered behind the shelves wasn't just bad customer service. It was something much darker. A team on the edge, a manager abusing power, and a mother who was just trying to survive, but breaking right in front of him. This isn't just a story about retail. This is a story about how good companies rot from the inside when no one's paying attention. Stay with me till the end, because what this CEO did next might restore your faith in leadership, or make you wonder, would your boss do the same? The automatic doors slid open with a familiar whoosh, and in walked a middle-aged man whose faded jacket and low-slung cap made him look like just another tired shopper. But hidden beneath that modest exterior was Daniel Grayson, the very founder and CEO of the entire Grayson's market chain, a man whose vision had once created a family-run empire that prided itself on integrity and fair treatment. And yet today, he found himself slipping through his own front doors unnoticed, anonymous and observing, because something had changed, something was deeply wrong, and he needed to see it with his own eyes. His gaze moved slowly across the store, shelves untidy, displays in disarray, and the air thick with an invisible tension that prickled his skin, a complete absence of the warm chatter and lively greetings that had once defined his stores. Instead, there was silence. Uneasy movements, customers who looked around nervously or kept their heads down, and workers who avoided eye contact like shadows passing through light. And then he saw her, a young woman at checkout lane 4, her loosely tied hair barely concealing the redness around her eyes, her trembling hands scanning items for customers who barely acknowledged her existence. And Daniel, ducking behind a shelf of canned goods, saw it plainly. She wiped away a tear mid-shift, and it wasn't subtle. It was the kind of weary, hopeless motion that only comes from enduring far more than a bad day. And then, slicing through the air like a crack of thunder, came the voice. "Kendra!" shouted a tall, broad-shouldered man in a black vest with Troy stitched in red across the chest, emerging from the back like a storm cloud, clipboard in hand, eyes burning with anger. And he didn't lower his voice as he barked, "Crying on shift again! How many times do I have to tell you? If you can't keep it together, then quit," slamming his clipboard onto the counter with a force that made nearby customers flinch. Kendra stiffened, her lips trembling as she tried to apologize, whispering, "I'm sorry, I'll be fine." But Troy leaned in, lowering his voice just enough to hiss, "You've already taken 2 days off this month. Don't be surprised if your shift disappears next week." And just like that, he turned and vanished into the office, leaving behind the aftershock of public humiliation, while the rest of the staff and customers remained frozen, eyes avoiding, mouths shut, as if they hadn't seen or heard a thing. Daniel stood behind the shelf, fists clenched in his coat pockets, his heart pounding. Because this wasn't leadership, it wasn't discipline, it was cruelty. And he knew that this moment, this girl, this store, was the symptom of something far worse spreading through his once proud company. Trying to remain unnoticed, he drifted through the aisles, noting every detail. A promotional sign leaning against a trash bin, a carton of eggs cracked and left unreplaced, the smell of stale coffee overpowering any sense of freshness, and an eerie quiet in the produce section, where he watched an onion roll onto the floor and sit there, forgotten, its papery skin dry and brittle like the morale of the people working here. Gone were the days when staff lined up each morning to greet the first customer, when floors were polished and shelves pristine, and when employees wore their uniforms with pride. Now, Daniel saw only exhaustion etched in every face. And behind that exhaustion, a deeper wound. Not laziness, but defeat, as if the soul of the place had been slowly bled dry. In the frozen food section, a young male employee stubbed his toe on a pallet and simply winced and continued, while an elderly woman stood at the service desk for 3 whole minutes without a single person acknowledging her presence. And a female worker replacing a price tag on a freezer door looked so shaky, Daniel thought she might fall. And still, no one said anything, no one dared. And Daniel knew why. They had stopped believing anyone cared, stopped believing that speaking up made any difference. He recalled the brown envelope he'd received a few weeks earlier, No return address, no frills, just a hastily scribbled note. Someone at your store is being pushed to the edge. You should look into it before it's too late. And while his regional directors scoffed, calling it just another Gen Z tantrum, Daniel had kept the letter, because something in the tone, the quiet urgency, the restrained fear, rang true. Now he saw it firsthand. The system he had built to uplift was now being used to grind people down, and that revelation sat on his chest like a stone as he moved slowly through the store, watching not as a CEO, but as a human being horrified by what his absence had allowed. When the break came, Daniel purchased a snack from the vending machine and lingered near the staff room. Drawn by the quiet sobbing behind the door, and what he heard froze him, Kendra's voice, broken and low, whispering between choked breaths. "I can't do this anymore. I tried. I really tried, but nothing's ever enough. They cut my hours again, and I can't even afford gas. My rent's late." And then the softer voice of the young man from Frozen Goods, gently responding, "Troy's coming after me too. Anyone with kids, or who gets sick or asks for time off, he punishes them." And Kendra replied, crying, "My son had an asthma attack. He was hospitalized. I begged Troy, but he said I wasn't trustworthy." And in that moment, Daniel understood in his gut that this wasn't just an overworked staff or a broken system. It was emotional abuse sanctioned by silence, and it was breaking people. Later that evening, Daniel watched from a distance as Kendra exited the store, her figure small and tired beneath the flickering parking lot lights, and followed quietly as she walked toward an old, dented sedan, the rear window patched with clear tape and the paint fading in flakes. She opened her wallet and sifted through it, a utility bill, a photo ID, and a nail clipper, and then shook it upside down. A few coins fell into her hand, and she stared at them for a long moment before her body crumpled into sobs in the middle of the lot, clutching her face, shoulders shaking, as the sign of the store her labor helped run glowed cold and indifferent behind her. Daniel couldn't move, he couldn't breathe, because what he was seeing wasn't numbers or margins or KPIs. It was the human cost of negligence, the price of allowing power without oversight. And it was written in Kendra's tears, in her cracked hands, in the silence that haunted every corner of the store. He had once believed that leading with fairness would ensure fairness below, that a good culture started at the top. But now he knew better. Leadership doesn't end when the logo is printed or the policies are written. It continues every day in the actions of those given authority and in the willingness of those above to hold them accountable. And as Daniel stood under the harsh glow of the streetlights, watching one of his own employees collapse under a system that bore his name, he made a decision, not out of obligation, but out of something deeper. A conviction reignited by heartbreak, that no one in his company would suffer unseen again, because if there was still a soul left in Grayson's market, he would reclaim it, not with policies or memos, but with presence, action, and a promise never to look away again. Daniel stepped deeper into the store, the dim fluorescent lights casting flickers across the scuffed linoleum tiles as he moved past aisles that once held pride but now sagged under the weight of neglect. Every shelf whispered a story of abandonment, from half-stocked rows of cereal boxes with fading labels to entire gaps where soup cans should have been. The absence was louder than noise. He passed a row of dented coffee makers boxed in dusty cardboard, then a shelf of expired crackers where even the discount tags had curled with age. Employees moved like ghosts, quiet, distant, resigned. One young man, no older than 20, stubbed his toe on a carelessly abandoned pallet. He winced, limped slightly, but said nothing. No one turned to help. No one asked if he was okay. An elderly customer stood near the help desk, holding a return slip in one hand and a cane in the other. She waited. 1 minute. Then another. Then a third. Her shoulders slumped, the hope of being seen draining from her face, before she shuffled quietly away. In the frozen food section, a woman reached upward, struggling to replace a price tag. Her hands trembled, her knees wobbled, and her breathing came in short, shallow bursts, like standing was a battle she was slowly losing. Daniel noticed every detail, every silence, every bruise of fatigue that shadowed the faces of those around him. This wasn't about laziness or poor management or undertrained staff. This was something deeper, something festering. He thought back to that meeting just weeks ago when the plain brown envelope had landed silently on the boardroom table. No return address, just a few handwritten words. Someone is being pushed to the edge. You should look into it before it's too late. His regional directors had scoffed. Probably a Gen Z kid sulking over not getting promoted, one had said. They all want raises for just showing up, another had chuckled. Daniel had said nothing at the time, just quietly pocketed the envelope and wondered. Now he didn't need to wonder. The truth stood right in front of him in every aisle. These employees weren't angry. They weren't rebellious. They were tired. Not the kind of tired that a lunch break or a vacation could fix. Soul tired. Worn down by neglect, by fear, by the silent grind of never being seen, never being heard, and never being believed. It was in their posture, the droop of shoulders, the hesitant steps, the flickers of panic in their eyes when someone raised a voice nearby. And it was in their silence, that heavy, unnatural silence that blanketed the store like a fog. It used to be that a visit to Grayson's market was full of warmth, laughter behind counters, good morning echoing from the bakery and the scent of fresh coffee drawing in early shoppers. Now it was just dim lights, cold air, and the quiet sound of people breaking. Daniel lingered near the break room during staff lunch, not to intrude, just to listen. He heard nothing at first. Then, softly, the sound of crying. Quiet, careful, broken crying. I can't do this anymore, Kendra's voice floated through the cracked door. I tried so hard. My son was in the hospital, and Troy said I wasn't trustworthy. A second voice joined, tired, male, whispering. He's doing it to me, too. Anyone with a kid or who gets sick, he punishes. He's waiting for us to quit so he doesn't have to fire us. Daniel closed his eyes, his stomach turning. This wasn't just mismanagement. This was cruelty, punishment for being human, retaliation masked as performance reviews. His hand brushed the steel frame of the vending machine, grounding himself as the weight of what he'd created sank in. He had built this. Not directly, maybe. Not with intention. But he had built a system where this could grow. A culture where silence was expected. Where suffering was ignored, where regional reports with green graphs and inflated success stories buried the pain of the people on the ground. He had trusted the chain to run itself while he stepped back. That was his mistake. That was his responsibility, and the only way to fix it was from within. He wouldn't announce himself, not yet. People didn't need a savior with a name badge and a title. They needed someone who understood what it meant to hurt quietly. That night, Daniel sat in his car long after the parking lot had emptied. The only light came from the flickering bulb above the loading dock, and the silence was broken only by the occasional hum of a streetlight, struggling to stay awake. He thought about the woman in the frozen foods aisle, the boy with the stubbed toe, the elderly lady with the return slip. He thought about Kendra's trembling hands and cracked voice. Then he thought about the name, Grayson's Market, glowing red and white on the building's side, his name, his legacy, and he realized the legacy wasn't the logo, it wasn't the expansion, it wasn't even the revenue, it was the people, and right now they were falling apart, one shift at a time, one broken moment at a time. Daniel opened his notebook, and he began to write. Daniel stood just outside the break room, his back against the cold wall of the hallway, granola bar in hand, but his appetite completely gone, ears locked on the heartbreaking voices seeping through the thin wooden door. The sobs were quiet, stifled, the kind of crying one does when they've already cried too much and are just trying not to collapse. I can't do this anymore, came Kendra's voice again, hushed and tired, like the last flicker of a candle before it surrenders to the dark. I really tried. I show up. I'm never late. I pick up shifts, but it's never enough. I begged Troy when my son had that asthma attack. He was in the ER, couldn't breathe, and I asked for just one day, and Troy said I wasn't reliable, that I was a risk to the team. Daniel leaned forward, hands clenched in fists so tight his nails pressed into his palms. A second voice chimed in, quiet but shaken. Probably the young man from the frozen foods section. He's after me, too. Ever since I told him I might need a few days off for a family emergency, he's been docking my hours. He schedules me back to back, then tells me I'm underperforming. It's like if you're not perfect every second, he puts a target on your back. Another voice joined, a third, older, perhaps from the service counter. He said I was too slow with returns, but I've got arthritis in both hands, and when I asked for a stool to sit on during long shifts, he said I wasn't cut out for retail. The stories poured out like water from a cracked dam. Quiet admissions, broken whispers, small confessions that were clearly being carried in silence for far too long. One employee admitted they'd stopped eating lunch just to afford gas. Another said they'd pawned a family heirloom to make rent after their hours were cut. Kendra's voice, trembling but steadier now, said, I used to love working here. Back when we had those morning meetings and the manager would actually greet us by name. Now it feels like we're prisoners. We get barked at, watched, judged and discarded if we're not smiling 24/7, even when everything in our life is falling apart. The young man added, I saw Troy yell at a teenage cashier last week because she forgot to ask if the customer had a rewards card. She cried the whole walk home. Well, certainly called her dead weight in front of everyone. Daniel could barely breathe. His chest was heavy, not from guilt alone, but from a growing rage at what his company, no, what the people entrusted to run his company, had allowed to fester. The break room had once been designed as a place of comfort, a sanctuary between the madness of retail life. Now it was a confessional, and Daniel was the silent priest outside the booth, absorbing every word with horror. He couldn't stop thinking of that brown envelope from weeks ago, the anonymous warning, someone is being pushed to the edge, look before it's too late. And now he realized it wasn't just someone, it was everyone. Daniel pulled away before anyone inside could notice him. He walked past the back aisles, not even pretending to browse anymore. Every detail of the store screamed neglect now. The flickering lights, the dirty baseboards, the stale smell of overworked bodies and undercleaned floors. The staff wasn't lazy, they were broken, held together by the fraying threads of financial survival and quiet desperation. He thought of his grandfather, who started the first Grayson's Market with a single rule. Treat workers like family, and they'll treat customers like gold. That legacy was being destroyed aisle by aisle by a man like Troy. And what shook Daniel most was that it hadn't happened overnight. No, this rot had grown slowly, silently, right under the surface, while quarterly reports painted a different picture. He knew now that data doesn't show despair. Spreadsheets don't cry in break rooms. Profit margins don't go home to empty fridges. That night, Daniel didn't go home either. He sat in his car in the parking lot, engine off, watching as Kendra exited, shoulders slumped, backpack frayed, keys dangling from one tired hand. She didn't look up, didn't notice the CEO of the company watching her from 20 feet away. She walked to a beat-up sedan, opened the door, sat inside, and just stared through the windshield. 10 minutes passed. She didn't move. Daniel did. He pulled out his phone, took a deep breath, and made the first of many calls. The next day was different. He arrived before opening, not as a customer, but as the owner. He wore no badge. No announcement was made. But when the store opened, every employee was summoned to the break room, where Daniel stood, hands clasped, eyes heavy. "My name," he began, "is Daniel Grayson, and I owe all of you an apology." The room was silent. Kendra's eyes widened. The young man from Frozen Foods looked down. "This store," Daniel said, "was supposed to be a place of community. It's not just a business to me, it carries my family's name. And lately, it's lost its soul. That's on me." Someone in the back coughed. Kendra's lips parted, speechless. Daniel continued, "I've listened, I've seen, and I know the pain some of you carry to even walk through these doors. That ends now." He pulled a slip of paper from his coat. "Effective immediately, your current store supervisor, Troy Barnett, is suspended pending investigation. Corporate HR will arrive in 24 hours to conduct interviews, and any retaliation for honesty will result in immediate termination. From now on, this break room will be a safe space. Complaints will be taken seriously, and for anyone who's struggled, you will not be ignored." The room was still silent, but now it pulsed with emotion. Some employees shifted forward, hopeful. Others blinked back tears. Kendra covered her mouth. "We're also increasing base pay by 15%, Daniel added. "And we're implementing an emergency hardship fund for staff with medical or family crises, because this isn't just about policy, it's about people." In a long pause followed. Then the young man spoke. "You really saw?" Daniel nodded. "I saw everything." Kendra whispered, "Thank you." And though it was barely audible, it rippled through the room like a wave. People straightened their backs. A breath of air filled lungs, long collapsed. Outside, the lights flickered to life. The store opened, and for the first time in what felt like forever, someone said, "Good morning," with meaning. Daniel stepped aside, hands still shaking, heart full but heavy. The road ahead was long, the rot ran deep. But at last, the healing had begun. The night was cold and still, the kind of stillness that hangs in the air after something sacred has broken. And Daniel remained inside his vehicle, parked under the flickering light of the Graysons' market lot, watching from a distance as Kendra exited through the sliding glass doors for what might have been the 100th time that week, but felt like a lifetime carved into a single shift. She moved like someone sleepwalking, not tired from lack of sleep, but worn down by the weight of trying to survive, trying to show up, trying to act like everything was okay when it clearly wasn't. Her bag dangled from one shoulder, threads pulling loose at the seams, the zipper half broken, the weight of it not nearly as heavy as what she carried inside. Her jacket, thin and wrinkled, did little to protect against the creeping chill of the evening wind. Daniel didn't move. He just watched, eyes focused, fingers pressed to the steering wheel so tightly they had turned pale. She approached her car. An aging sedan that had seen better decades, its paint flaked off in patches like dead bark peeling from a tree. The rear window had a strip of duct tape, barely holding together what must have been a long-forgotten crack, and one tire sagged like it had given up too. Kendra reached into her pocket, pulled out her wallet, and paused under the fluorescent spill of the parking lot lights. Daniel saw her flip through its contents slowly, like she was searching for something she already knew wasn't there. A folded bill, a card, a miracle. Instead, she turned the wallet upside down. A few coins fell into her hand, just coins. Not enough for gas, not enough for rent, maybe just enough for a vending machine snack. She stared at them, then closed her hand around them, trembling. And then, without warning, she covered her face and dropped into a crouch beside her car, sobbing into her palms, silent but raw, her shoulders shaking like tree branches in a thunderstorm. Daniel swallowed the lump rising in his throat, feeling helpless, witnessing what no quarterly report, no earnings forecast, no balance sheet had ever shown him. The human cost. The real cost. This was what it looked like. Not data points or revenue projections, just a woman who had given everything she had to a company that for a time she believed in and now had nothing left to give, nothing to show for it but exhaustion, debt, and tears shed in an empty parking lot beneath a company logo that bore Daniel's own last name. He didn't step forward. Not yet. Because this moment wasn't about him. It was about seeing, and for the first time, truly seeing. He sat in silence as her cries softened, fading into tired breaths and quiet resolve. She eventually stood, wiped her face, got into her car, and drove off into the night with a tank, likely running on fumes and a soul that wasn't far behind. That was the moment something shifted inside Daniel. Not just guilt, not just anger, but a responsibility so deep it struck bone. He drove home, not in silence, but replaying every second. Her sobs echoed louder than any boardroom applause. Her empty wallet weighed heavier than any investment return. He pulled into his driveway, but didn't get out of the car for almost 30 minutes. That night, he didn't sleep. Instead, he wrote. Not just a letter, a plan, a roadmap, a promise to himself, to the workers, to every Kendra, in every branch of his company who had cried in silence while leaders like him stayed comfortable behind conference tables and performance charts. He wrote until the sun rose. The next morning he returned to that same store. Only this time he didn't hide behind shelves. He wore a name badge that simply read, Daniel. Nothing else. He clocked in as a trainee. The manager that corporate sent to temporarily oversee operations nodded in understanding. Daniel didn't ask for special treatment. He stocked shelves, faced products, cleaned spills, ran register training with a teenage employee who hadn't smiled in weeks. He swept the break room floor while Kendra reheated a cup of instant noodles. She didn't recognize him at first, not in that uniform, not looking tired like the rest of them, but when she did, her eyes widened, confusion washing over her. "What are you doing here?" she asked quietly. Daniel looked up, offering the faintest smile. "Learning, Joel," he said, and he meant it. Over the next 3 weeks, Daniel worked side by side with every employee. He listened, observed, took notes not just on tasks, but on moods, silences, moments of hesitation, and glimmers of joy when someone finally felt heard. He watched as morale, slowly and awkwardly, began to shift. Not all at once. Healing never does. But little things like laughter in the break room, or someone offering to help a colleague lift a heavy box without being asked. The company sent auditors. HR reviewed every complaint filed in the last 12 months. Troy, when confronted with the allegations, folded quickly under scrutiny. Multiple formal complaints had been buried or misreported. Patterns of retaliation were confirmed. He was terminated, permanently. And the news spread like wind through dry grass. Daniel began implementing structural changes. Not just reactionary patches, but core reforms. Every Grayson's Market branch now had an anonymous support hotline run by third-party mental health professionals. Emergency leave could be granted without punishment. Store managers would be reviewed quarterly, not just on sales, but on team well-being. Staff with children would receive schedule flexibility. Wage adjustments would follow cost of living indexes by city. But more than policies, Daniel focused on culture. Each store was given a monthly budget for staff appreciation, not corporate gifts, but local recognition programs voted on by the employees themselves. Kendra, still quiet, still healing, was promoted to assistant manager within a month. Not out of pity, but because she had become the anchor others looked to when things got hard. Her empathy was now her leadership, and she thrived. Slowly, the name Grayson's Market began to mean something again. Customers noticed. They started commenting on the change in tone, the difference in energy. "Feels like the old days," one elderly man said, nodding with a smile. "The people here actually care again." But Daniel knew that wasn't magic. It was earned. With every hard conversation, every policy rewritten, every moment he chose to show up, not as a CEO, but as someone willing to stand in the same shoes as his team. One day, Daniel asked Kendra if she would share her story at a company-wide leadership summit. She hesitated, then agreed. She stood on that stage, not with flash or fanfare, but with a quiet strength that silenced the entire room. "I was invisible," she said, "not because I didn't try, but because I stopped being seen. That nearly broke me. Until someone finally stopped looking at the numbers and started seeing the people." There was not a dry eye in the room. The next day, Daniel received dozens of emails from regional leaders who had, for the first time, realized how disconnected they'd become. One even wrote, "I've been Troy," without realizing it. "Thank you for showing us what we forgot." And so the culture changed. Not perfectly, not quickly, but genuinely. It became about stories, about names, about real human lives behind every shift. Daniel stood outside the flagship store one night, same parking lot, same wind, but a different energy. Inside, the lights were still on, music played. Two cashiers laughed over a silly ringtone. The manager chatted with a customer at the door, and in the distance, Kendra stood by a register, showing a new trainee how to process returns with patience and a smile. Daniel exhaled, long and slow, hands in his pockets, heart full. The logo above the building no longer felt like a burden. It felt like a responsibility, the kind you carry not just with pride, but with humility. Because at the end of it all, success wasn't measured in store openings or shareholder returns. It was measured in moments like this. A woman who had once cried alone in a parking lot, now leading others with strength, purpose, and compassion. That was the promise he made, and the one he would never break. In a world where too many stories go unnoticed and too many people suffer in silence, it's time we stop looking the other way. Because behind every quiet face in the break room, behind every forced smile at the register, there's a story that matters. If this story meant something to you, don't let it stop here. Like the video, if you believe every worker deserves basic respect. Leave a comment and share your thoughts. Your voice could help someone else feel seen. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it, whether it's a friend, a manager, or someone who forgot what real leadership looks like. And subscribe for more real stories that speak to what's broken and what we can fix together. Because change doesn't start at the top. It starts when we stop ignoring what's right in front of us.